Welcome to Blackbriar Gaming. The 40k Chaos Space Marine line is looking better than ever, absolutely dripping with chaotic goodness. Many of you may be wondering if or how you could include them in your Horus Heresy armies. I touched on it briefly during my cheaper Horus Heresy army video, but I thought I'd take the time to go legion by legion and discuss exactly how chaotic they were all getting throughout the Heresy, and how some of the legions can take advantage of the great traitorous miniatures we're seeing in 40k. Just a quick note before we get into it. As we're a new channel, a subscribe and a like really helps us reach a bigger audience. So if you enjoy the video, please hit those buttons down below. Starting off, Alpha Legion, the probably least corrupt of them all, because, are these guys even really traitors, or are they just playing the long game for the good of the Imperium? Who can say? Either way, kept it decidedly non-chaosy throughout the Heresy. Leave those spiky bits off. If you disagree, please let me know down below, but I can't think of any instances where the Alpha Legion was getting overly demonic or doing weird chaosy shenanigans. So we'll move on. Next up, the Iron Warriors. They were pretty clean cut throughout the Heresy with, from my understanding, almost zero corruption, except for Oldmate Volk, an Iron Warrior who became our first Obliterator. The Iron Warriors do make extensive use of corrupted allies throughout the Heresy, however, and in particular at the Siege of Terra. There's some wonderful parts in the Siege of Terra novels about, in particular, the Beastmen, almost the Imperial Guard that have turned beast style, surging across no man's land and just getting blown to absolute bits. It's a lot of fun. Both Traitor Imperial Army units and Dark Mechanicum allies would fit right in besides an Iron Warriors army. Those new Kill Team Militarum traitors are perfect for pairing with the Iron Warriors, and I'll be looking very closely at them myself when the rules for Imperial armies finally come out. When it comes to the Dark Mechanicum, well, you can just about go to town. A lot of the recent 40k Demon engines would fit in perfectly and make great conversion material with the existing Mechanicum line. That big spiky spider thing in particular gets my Dark Mechanicum vibes flowing. We don't know what the Allies' rules look like yet, and what these armies will be able to take, but I'm sure it'll be flexible enough to incorporate the miniatures I've talked about and to put some great chaotic allies in with your more pure Iron Warriors. Next up, Night Lords. So I love the old school Chaos Raptors for use in a Night Lords Legion. I actually watched a battle report the other day where someone had a great unit of these and had them in their Night Lord Legion, and they fit in beautifully. You could also get away with using bits and pieces from the Chaos line, particular trophy bits here and there, in combination with Heresy Marks of Armor. We're talking skulls, spikes, flayed skin, you get the idea. But compared to other legions, they're not particularly demony or corrupted in the truly chaotic sense at this point, not during the Heresy. They're just the same old psychopaths they were prior to turning traitors. Emperor's Children. So the Emperor's Children had delved deep into depravity almost at the beginning of the Heresy. Indeed, Fulgrim had gone full Demon Primarch by the Siege of Terra, one of only a few. Early on in the Heresy, the Emperor's Children had begun to enhance themselves beyond mere Space Marines. In fact, I believe they'd done this even before they technically turned official traitor. You can get real creative with the 3rd Legion and their early embracement of Slaanesh. But the current Chaos line, unfortunately, doesn't really support the Emperor's Children and the kind of bits you'd want to combine with your Legion Marines. Now that we have a World Eaters Codex coming out, however, I'm hopeful that an Emperor's Children Codex isn't far behind, and I will be so into that. Age of Sigmar does have a Slaanesh line. What are they called? I don't know, something of Slaanesh. They're all about it. So there could be some bits and pieces out of that line, actually, that fit really nicely, noting the scale issues and the huge miniatures you get in Age of Sigmar. But there could be bits and pieces that you chuck in or some cool conversion ideas for your Emperor's Children coming out of the Slaaneshi Age of Sigmar models. There's also some old school 40k Emperor's Children bits and pieces. There's this famous metal head with the speaker coming out of its mouth and the one with the weird bits coming out. I don't know, they got pretty funky back in the early 2000s, I think. So track them down. I don't believe they're for sale anymore. You can track them down on eBay or there's also some third-party bits you can use too from various alternate third-party websites. If you're looking for a chaosy-looking army to use in Horus Heresy games, the 3rd Legion Emperor's Children is definitely one of your best bets. Wordbearers. Wordbearers are the poster boys for turning to chaos early and before everyone else got the chance, and while the majority of their forces were still wearing heresy marks of armor, the Galvor back, and their characters in particular, were going full chaos quite early on in the heresy. The new possessed Chaos Space Marines are GW's best attempt at the unit yet, but honestly, they still don't really compare to the beauty of Forge World's Galvor back miniatures. They're just so nice, so why wouldn't you use them? And with the price of new GW releases, the Galvor back might actually be cheaper than the possessed Chaos Space Marines when they come up. We'll have to wait and see on that one. If you're looking for a character beyond the Wordbearers characters that are available from Forge World and actually quite well represented, the Chaos Space Marine Dialogus, let's see if I get that right, would be a pretty great choice. And it's a pretty cool model as well. He's got his little cultist followers as well. Love it. You could make something quite thematic and scenic in a bit of a bigger base. Once again, you could use the Dialogus, but the Heresy miniatures are kind of better, so why would you? And that's kind of a theme throughout the Wordbearers. Their Contemptor Dreadnought, the demon style one, I don't know the official name for it, but Wordbearers Contemptor guy, Dreadnought, demony goodness, looks awesome, right? So why would you go and grab some Chaos Hellbrutes to represent Chaosy Dreadnoughts when you've got that guy just sitting there? Where I think the 40k line does shine for the Wordbearers is the new Cultist models we've recently had revealed and that are no doubt coming out soon. Wordbearers and Cultists go hand in hand, so if you're looking for an excuse to get those fun new Cultists from the 40k line into your legions, this would be the best way to go, and possibly the only way to go. I don't know if the aesthetics of the Cultists really fit many other armies. We're not sure what the Cultists or the Imperial armies are going to look like I said before, with the new edition, but I'd be very surprised if there's not a way to include this miniature and these miniatures in a Wordbearers army with allies. The Cultists, they'll work them in, right? It's going to be a thing. Sons of Horus. So these guys got pretty chaotic as well. So if you're keen to use the 40k Chaos Marine line, the Sons of Horus may be a good choice. You can see the start of the spiky trend with their current Heresy line. Sons of Horus miniatures are quite angular, quite spiky, though certainly not to the extent of the modern Chaos Space Marines. They don't have nearly as much bling as all that gilded armor that Space Marines come with of the Chaos type. If you were interested in putting together a late Heresy era Sons of Horus army, and that's the key here, the late Heresy era, I would suggest combining bits and pieces of the Chaos Space Marine line sparingly with existing Heresy plastics. Don't go to town, and certainly just standing in Chaos Space Marines, not really appropriate if you want to keep thematic and match the narrative. The scale creep, however, may be an issue, but sticking to Mark 6 Marines, which we've seen are a bit bigger than your Mark 4 and Mark 3, would be recommended in this case. Indeed, the Mark 6 are almost as tall as those new 40k Chaos Space Marines, so the best bet for mixing and matching bits. Sons of Horus also have their own brand of possessed Marines. I can't for the life of me remember the name, but you get the gist, and you can probably Google it, I'm sure. So this would be a great use of the new Chaos Space Marine possessed lads to differentiate them from the Galvor back. The last thing you want to do is chuck a bunch of Galvor back in with your Sons of Horus army. They belong with the Wordbearers, but if you want to have possessed Marines still, 40k's got you back. Even your basic Marines were starting to get a little bit chaosy. We've seen some recent artwork from the Siege of Terror novel series, where there's in particular this one Sons of Horus that's looking backwards, kind of towards, I guess, our point of view, and he's got this really cool demonic face going on. So some of the more corrupted bits from the Chaos Space Marine squad, especially some of those demonish bear heads, which have a few little horns sticking out of them and looking a bit weird, they would work quite well, and I think that'd be the way to go. But once again, late Heresy. Late Heresy, people. They are not kicking off the Heresy in any kind of possessed manner. Thousand Sons up next. So a late Heresy era Thousand Sons army could definitely get away with using bits and pieces from their 40k line, that is the Thousand Sons 40k line, if not just substituting whole units in. I think you can get away with it. It's because they had, after all, been hanging out in the Eye of Terror for most of the Heresy at this point. Once they got slapped by the Space Wolves, they ran away. Eye of Terror hung out there for most of the Heresy. We're talking a decade here, right? They did come in for a couple of little conflicts here and there back into real space, but for the most part, they're out on their new demon world, getting nice and corrupted. Even if they hadn't yet turned to dust. Now, I did some research, and I am 99% sure the rubric happened after the Heresy, but it was really hard to find something that confirmed that, besides some ramblings from various Thousand Sons fans on the internet. But yep, so they're not dusty yet, but they could definitely wear those more baroque and stylized bits of armor that you see from the 40k Thousand Sun lines. I would, however, much like the Death Guard that I'm about to talk with, I would replace the weapons that those Thousand Sun units are carrying with all the dragon heads and weird stuff on them. I'd replace them with some more standard and more common 30k weapons, I think, if I was going to use them within the legions. As the Thousand Suns had very little to do with the early and mid Heresy, as I was saying, besides their conflict with the Space Wolves, a late Heresy Thousand Sun army is also more thematic. It works. Any game you come to, it's like, oh yeah, we're totally fighting on Terra, because that's what my boys are about. You can even get away with disc riding shenanigans, as we've seen it in recent Siege of Terra artwork, that novella that had Magnus slapped on the front. We had a bunch of sorcerers riding around on discs. Now, they were psychic in nature, kind of a whole bunch of light, more so than your spiky 40k equivalents, but I reckon you could get away with it as well. Death Guard. Alrighty, throughout the Heresy, the Death Guard got decidedly grimier, but don't actually get into their full chaos moment until right before the Siege of Terra. They arrive in the Sol system, having been nurgled up by some poor leadership choices, and while they haven't fully embraced chaos in the way a 40k Death Guard army might, they're certainly on their way. I think there are plenty of bits and pieces from the 40k line that fit in with a late Heresy era army. Most of the 40k Death Guard line, in fact. Those miniatures, look, they get a bit silly at some points with nurglings and weird psychic power and goo and weird nurgly flames coming out of them. You'd need to clean them up a bit. So while the Death Guard have been a little bit plagued up, they haven't gone full plague, right? We're not talking 40k, 10,000 years down the line where they've just been stewing in their own nurgle juices. So if you're going to be using the 40k Death Guard miniatures, I'd do a bit of cleaning, a little bit of converting, mix some Heresy armor bits and pieces in there, and definitely convert them to make sure that they're wielding Heresy era weapons as well, not the crazy stuff that the new Plague Marines come with. Before you go putting them on the table in Heresy games. I may, in fact, do this myself in the future. I'm pretty keen on it. I think they look great. Great excuse to grab the Death Guard line and not have to play 40k. But yes, some cleaning up required. Interestingly, 40k Mortarion is pretty good to go for the Siege of Terra, wings and all. The latest novel we've had, Warhawk, has great descriptions of Demon Mortarion with his weird beetle wing things going on, and the 40k Mortarion model works perfectly here. You would have some issues if you're playing early and mid Heresy, obviously, so it might be worth picking up a regular Mortarion as well, noting you've just dropped $400 to $500 if you're getting both, because he was not demony until the Siege. Anything before that, he was just regular old dirty Mortarion. So that's the Death Guard. Moving on, we've got, finally, the last traitor legion is the World Eaters. So those 20-year-old 40k Berserk models have aged just a tad, and I wouldn't be rushing to shoehorn them into a Horus Heresy game. We do know that we have a World Eaters 40k Codex coming in the future, which will no doubt be accompanied by a wild amount of miniatures. But look, the World Eaters, for all of their bloodlust, had not in fact been overly corrupted by the time the Siege of Terra comes around. If you look at the 40k Khan model and compare it to the 30k Khan model, there's pretty significant differences there. And I'd say that even at the Siege of Terra, the 30k Khan model is more appropriate. The Primarch had done his own thing. He'd gone full demon. But his Legion, look, kind of hated him. Angron was a jerk, and they weren't overly keen to rush headlong after him into demonhood. So they're not doing the same thing. The Legion itself, look, while they're covered in gore, you're not wrong, and you could get away with a whole bunch of skull trophies for them, for sure, much like the Night Lords. They are filthy, blood-caked monsters, but not spiky, not demony. They're doing their regular things, just dialing it up to 11. The current Forge World line works for them really well, and is mostly appropriate throughout the entire Heresy. And that's it. That's all the legions. So we've got a few that are a bit chaosy there. Let's see, the best bets, if you want to get the chaos line involved, would be your Emperor's Children, Wordbearers, Sons of Horus, Thousand Suns, and Death Guard. Thousand Suns and Death Guard obviously having their own specific lines that work beautifully with them. That is all our Heresy chats for today. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully this answers the many questions I've seen about Chaos Miniatures and Horus Heresy gaming. I'm also hoping it's inspired a few funky-looking late Heresy era armies too. Do note, though, that if you are going to go down the late Heresy route, Don't be upset if you turn up to some more narrative campaigns and get some strange looks. It's nice to go with a more generic kind of army so that you feel like you could use it across the entirety of the heresy, because there are going to be very narrative focused campaigns. So keep that in mind. Make sure to keep rolling those dice and getting hyped for heresy.